very good morning and a very warm welcome to the Energy Security Conference 2020 by Global Counter-Terrorism Council, GCTC, in association with the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, the Central Board of Irrigation and Power, the Federation of Petroleum Industry, and MidCat Advisory. This is Hema Bisht from MidCat Advisory Services. So we had a very, very interesting day yesterday and a lot of insights that we arrived at by the end of the day. Today as well, we have a very, very interesting session coming up ahead. There were a lot of points that came up yesterday, that when we have a global energy vision, there has to be a safety of balance between developmental plans and economic plans. How policies need to be put in place when one moves towards renewable energy sources. What are the policies that need to be the kind of policy frameworks that have to be supporting this kind of energy transition in a more responsible manner towards sustainable goals. How do we set an energy economic equilibrium? You need a stable generation and consumption regime. Dr. Parikh yesterday talked about moving from fossil fuels like oil to biofuels like cellulosic ethanol. One needs to diversify energy supplies. There is a need for decarbonization of the power sector and moving towards electrical mobility. Yesterday, Ms. Powell talked about how we do talk about moving towards kind of electrical mobility, but what is the energy cost in producing a battery? So it's a very, very complex dynamic, when we traverse this ecosystem of trying to move towards, renewable sources of energy and moving towards net zero. So what does this energy future of India look like? That's the session that we are looking at now. The session coming up now is on the energy future of India. So let me just introduce our panelists to you. Give me a second while I just put up the presentation. Just a moment. Right. So these are our key speakers for today. Let me start by introducing the session chair for today, Siddharth Zarabi, senior journalist and the managing editor of NewJ Plus. He has over 2 decades of experience in the media industry. Mr. Zarabi has led newsrooms in Indian print companies, as well as headed 2 business news channels with global partners. He has been credited with multiple content and platform innovations in the fiercely competitive news industry and has deep knowledge and wide experience across the media value chain. Very warm welcome to you, Mr. Zarabi. Wonderful to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much.
Let me get on with introducing the rest of our panelists now. Mr. Dinesh Dayanand Jagdale is currently the Joint Secretary of the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. He has previously also served as the CEO and Director of Panama Renewable Energy Group. Lovely to have you here, sir. A very warm welcome to you as well.
Thank you.
Mr. R.K. Vishnoi is the current Director of THDC India Limited. He's an honours graduate in civil engineering from BISC Pilani and has 33 years of experience in design, engineering and construction of hydro project structures. Very, very warm welcome to you, Mr. Vishnoi. Dr. S.S.V. Ramakumar is the Director and Director Research and Development at Indian Oil Corp Limited. Dr. Ramakumar is also on the board of Oil Industry Development Board, LanzaTech Inc. and Central Pollution Control Board, and member executive council at the Petroleum Conservation Research Association. Very warm welcome. Mr. Harish Saran presently heads the marketing division in PTC. He is responsible for short, medium, long-term power, sale or purchase in PTC. Innovative products are developed under his leadership as per the requirements of the customers, and he has 29 years of work experience in the power sector involving generation, transmission, commercial marketing, and trading fields. Next up, Mr. Neeraj Sethi, a graduate of IIT Mumbai. He is an internationally accomplished business leader with extensive leadership experience in general management, P&L, and business development in the upstream oil and gas industry, with a proven track record of building and running businesses at a country and regional level. He is currently the country leader for Baker Hughes and has held senior leadership positions with leading multinational companies. Very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you.
Also with us, Dr. Rashi Gupta, known as Battery Wali of India, the pioneer of manufacturing of advanced lithium batteries in India. She's the founder director of Vision Mechatronics Private Limited, leading it towards a name to reckon for in the field of robotics, renewable energy, and energy storage. Warm welcome to you, Dr. Gupta. Last but not the least with us, Mr. Amit Jain, who has a PhD in solar. He's a Fulbright scholar at NREL USA and Chevening Fellow at King's College London. He works with the World Bank and is leading a $2 billion renewable portfolio in India, Bangladesh, and Maldives. Very warm welcome to you, Mr. Jain. Once again, a very, very warm welcome to all our panelists and our chair. And without much ado now, I will hand over to you. Siddharth. Siddharth, over to you.
Good morning once again, and a very warm welcome to all of you on this excellent subject that we are debating. I welcome all of the panelists once again to this subject. What we are going to do over the next 60-75 odd minutes is I will request the entire panel to make opening remarks, and I would request you to bring the subject and the topic that you want to bring to the attention of all the people who are watching this live stream. And then we can follow it up with an interactive discussion. And I will request all of you, I'm going to help you keep time, so don't worry about that. But please remember, we have roughly 7 speakers, and if you multiply that by 5 minutes each, we will cover significant amounts of time. So what I'm going to do is I will request all the speakers to focus on their core subject, once again, just for the knowledge of all our live stream attendees at this point of time. We are discussing the energy future of India, and we want to, in this session, focus on the change in policies with respect to exploration and mining, a new economic equilibrium for energy stable generation and consumption. Biofuels, again, a very, very significant topic. A lot has been done in the country, but far more needs to be done. Renewable sources, how can that become a very sustainable, long-term and extremely affordable option? And of course, the infrastructure for electric mobility, easier said than done, but very, very significant. And then, of course, advanced tech like hydrogen fuel cells, where you could use them in heavy transportation. So I'm going to request Mr. Jagdale here to first set the agenda and introduce his thoughts on the subject. Over to you, Mr. Jagdale.
Thank you, Siddharth. Good morning, and pleasure to be amongst all the dignitaries here in this panel on the topic of energy future of India. My introduction, as Hima gave, I am working as the Joint Secretary at MNRE, and my thoughts would be coming from the renewable energy perspective, which MNRE has been focusing. So as just to set the tone and the limited time that I have, I will just take you through some of the achievements that we have done and what is the thought process in taking this renewable energy journey ahead. So first and foremost, I think we all understand that decarbonization is important to achieve the sustainable development goals. We in India have been increasing the share of renewable energy in its electricity mix and reducing the emission intensity by adopting to various measures, including large-scale RE projects, enhanced energy efficiency measures across all major sectors, a decentralized renewable energy, as well as electric vehicles. So these are some of the things that we are all focusing upon. And if you really look at the last 5 years, the progress during the last 5 years, we have witnessed the highest rate of growth in renewable energy capacity addition. RE deployment has been, in fact, doubled during these years, with maximum share of solar PV during the recent years. So more renewable energy capacity being added each year compared to the addition of fossil fuel, which actually is one of the areas which we should, which brings in the, which highlights the efforts of the government of India towards decarbonizing the entire electricity mix. One of the report which did mention that India's renewables are one of the cheapest in the world. The speed at which India has attained universal electricity access has unprecedented in Indian history. So there are very, very key achievements that we have done. And one of the reports that CEA had published did mention that the thermal capacity that grew during the last few years was at 9%, as against the RE capacity grew at 19% from a relatively low base of 16 gigawatts when it started during 2010. So considering the projected targets of RE in our country that would grow henceforth, and if you're talking of 175 gigawatt by December 2022, the growth at which we have to achieve is enormous. And we at Government of India are achieving that, are aiming to bring in more versatile business models that will help the Indian industry and the institutional investors across the globe to come and invest in India. So today we are at 88 gigawatt out of the total grid of 370 gigawatts. So 88 gigawatt is the installed and running capacity, and 45 gigawatt is under installation at various stages. And very soon, I think the balance tenders will also be published. So there will be a complete visibility of 175 gigawatt of worth of renewable energy projects, predominantly now majorly wind and solar being the prominent technologies which will take the major share. So in spite of these challenges which we had during the last 2 quarters of this year, the COVID pandemic challenges, the renewable energy penetration in the country did not really deter. It went on. New tenders have come up. RE and large hydro are on the rise. So RE share of electricity has in fact gone from 9% to 12% in the electricity mix. So if you really look at where are we moving now, we are moving towards a very stable, firm RE supply by bringing out the energy plus storage as one of the key focus areas of our bids now. We want the capacities to be added, which will give us firmness in the supply, which will give us dispatchable power as the output. And therefore, the storage, whether it is in terms of battery storage, pump storage, whether you call it new technologies where hydrogen can play a role, biomass plays a role, biofuels play a role. So all those stay RE plus, the inherent intermittent RE plus the firm RE would now be a part of our major growth story during the coming years. So mainstream renewables would be a key component of India's development vision of 2030. We know we have the Honorable Prime Minister has set up a huge target of 450 gigawatts. And therefore, every energy technology that comes in the electricity grid would be welcome. We would need huge amount of finance to do that. Our energy transition, which will depend on the renewable energy expansion and energy efficiency, will be our basis of clean, secure, and affordable energy supply, which is absolutely essential for our lives. And that is where I think the energy for the future lies. We will come up with various technology options. I am sure, I think the other panelists have been, we have an able panelist in this gathering where we should be talking on biofuels, hydrogen, and few other aspects of renewable energy and the enhanced electricity mix. So this is what I wanted to bring to the forum, that MNRE, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, is looking to enhance the electricity, the electricity mix of this country more and more towards RE. I'm sure the distributed RE will also play a major role. We will focus on that. Plus, I just wanted to also highlight the efforts that the government is taking in making the electricity, RE electricity reach to the end users, whether it's the agriculture sector, where the KUSUM program, which is one of the India's flagship program, where the farmers are now able to produce electricity and the different components and replace their existing diesel pump sets or the traditional AC pump sets to the DC pump sets. They can produce their power during the daytime. And also there are business models which will enable them to sell back or sell the energy, excess electricity back to the grid and become self-sufficient in terms of their energy needs. We are also focusing on the bioenergy aspect. The MNRE focuses on the biogas, bio-CNG, waste to energy aspect as well. So we, along with Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, are working on bio-CNG aspects under the Satat program. So that will be a huge step in bringing the gas economy also into place. So this is a wide variety of electricity mix which will now move from decarbonization, will move from carbonization to decarbonization, and will enable us a very, very secure, stable, made in India, make in India program of electricity in the energy future of India. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you, Siddharth.
Thank you very much. Before I go to the next speaker, I want to request all those who are in the meeting to mute their mics. We are getting some background noise. I will also request the admin here to please keep a note of muting all those who are not required. I'll also request those who are moving out of the frame to please switch off their video feed before they move from their chair, because that causes disturbance in the live stream. Kindly please switch off your video if you are moving out of the frame. I request once again, please switch off your video if you are moving out of the frame. I will now request Dr. SSV Ramakumar to kindly open with his remarks the topic that he has for us today. Over to you, Dr. SSV Ramakumar.
Thank you, Siddharth. Distinguished panelists and participants who are participating through web in this GCTC seminar on energy security of future. In fact, Mr. Jagdale, Joint Secretary from MNRE, has laid the ground very well, and I will just continue from where he left in his opening remarks. While the primary energy demand globally is going to increase 25% in business as usual scenario, in rapid and net zero emission scenario, it might still increase by 10%. And also the recently released BP Energy Outlook, it gives a startling scenario where the emission intensity, the carbon emission intensity may reduce, it's a wide variation. It may reduce by 90% in those two scenarios of rapid transition and or net zero emission transition. It may go up by 90% if business as usual scenario continues. Be that what it may, when it comes to India, while Jagdale Saab has mentioned about the endeavors as a nation that we are doing to increase our renewable pie in the energy basket, our national energy basket, by the sheer growth in economy of this country, we are going to have we are going to double up our energy demand by 2030, and accordingly oil industry as a whole is going to develop its refining capacity from the current 230 odd million metric tons to almost 500 million metric tons. But the only difference from the oil industry is that the petrochemical intensity of the refineries will go up now. Right now it stands at under 10%, but it will go, the petrochemical intensity will go up to 25%, as high as 25% with coming of age of crude to oil chemical technologies. The liquid fuel, there will be more flexibility for future refineries to switch over the product slates from liquid fuels to petrochemical product slates. I would concentrate more, as suggested in a way by the Joint Secretary from MNRE, on biofuels and hydrogen initiatives. While my company, Indian Oil, the largest oil refining and marketing company in the country, and Maharatna company, as all of you know, is having a plethora of renewable energy initiatives. I would confine myself to biofuels and what we are doing in biofuels, what is the national initiatives, which some of them has already been outlined by Mr. Jagdale, and what we are especially doing in hydrogen. Biofuels, the national mandate of ethanol blending in transportation fuel is 10, which is going to rise by 20% because the BIS specification is already out for 20%, but the availability of ethanol blendable for transportation fuel is not very great. Last year, the figure stands, national blending percentage stands at 4.4. All oil marketing companies, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas are endeavoring to raise this percentage, and many programs of we state-owned oil marketing companies, we are setting up 12 biorefineries where lignocellulosic biomass will be converted into ethanol so that the ethanol availability for blending in transportation fuel will increase. Jagdale Saab also mentioned about Satat program. I mean, this is a very, very aspirational and very aggressive campaign by Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. And our target is by 2023 in the country, there will be 5,000 biogas plants which will convert waste, all kinds of waste, whether it is municipal solid waste, whether it is organic waste, into biogas, compressed biogas, and all state-owned oil marketing companies will give offtake guarantee of this such produced gas, and at a very attractive price of 46 rupees per kg. And already three marketing companies of us, we have already issued collectively 500 letter of intents for these plants to come up, which are expected to produce 1 million metric ton of the gas. And the target is by 2023, we would be producing 15 million metric tons of gas. By that way, we would be contributing in the national target of raising gas usage from current 6% in the national energy pie to 15%. This is the clarion call given by Honorable Prime Minister. And my company is also setting up on its own many biomethanation plants. Coming from R&D, I can say that we have one of the best biomethanation technology, which ensures highest methane yield from any type of organic waste. Coming to hydrogen, though we are also dabbling into battery, whether it is batteries swapping or battery technologies, we somehow believe that while lithium is coming of age, and my other co-panelist is also there to talk about on lithium, we are somehow going for some new generation chemistries. And we announced that we are going to set up a metal air battery manufacturing unit where aluminum will be used. For obvious advantages that aluminum will bring in terms of lightweight and relative abundance as a natural resource for this country. Coming to hydrogen, we somehow believe in the scientific circles and at the policy level also, we all believe that hydrogen is the ultimate green mobility option. And electric mobility is at best a transient phase, which has to be converted into hydrogen-based fuel cell mobility. And fuel cell is nothing but electric mobility, but where the fuel is hydrogen. And the question is how you produce the hydrogen, whether you produce, whether you power this fuel cell with a gray hydrogen, which is through fossil fuels, or blue hydrogen, where fossil fuel generating units are conjuncted with carbon capture and utilization technologies, or you power this fuel cell with completely renewable hydrogen, where you produce hydrogen through solar powered electrolysis or any other route. There is another route, and we sincerely believe as a company that biomass gasification route for producing hydrogen is having a great potential for this country, and it will give very, very cost effective hydrogen. That's what we believe. And we are embarking upon an experiment which the nation is actually waiting with bated breath. In Delhi NCR region, we are going to convert 50 buses from CNG to hydrogen spiked CNG. When I say hydrogen spiked CNG, many countries have done this experiment before, but where they produced hydrogen separately and they physically blended that in CNG. But my company has come up with a patented technology where natural gas can be directly converted into hydrogen CNG mixture, where hydrogen percentage can be very precisely controlled at the optimal level. So we have set up a plant of 4 tons per day in Rajghat bus depot in Delhi, and this is about to be commissioned in couple of weeks, if not a couple of months. All statutory clearances are there. MORTH has just 2 days back announced HCNG as a fuel, auto fuel, and the specifications were in place. So 50 buses will be run, city buses in Delhi NCR roads, they will be run with HCNG. Our claim, our initial studies is that by simply switching over from CNG to HCNG, you can reduce 70% of carbon monoxide and 25% of hydrocarbon emissions and 4% of fuel economy. If these claims are validated in this wide scale, this trial is in fact advised by Honorable Supreme Court. We will be filing this report, and if these claims are validated, probably we are in for the first tryst as a nation with hydrogen economy and mainstreaming the hydrogen into the mobility sector of India, thus attempting in our own way decarbonization. So we have some other programs. We are working very closely with MNRE, MOPNG, and NITI Aayog for building up a hydrogen roadmap for this country. I would be interacting during the question answer session more on these subjects. I would stop here, and thanks once again the organizers for giving me this opportunity.
Dr. Ramakumar, thank you very much, and I particularly like that line very much. Tryst with hydrogen for mobility. I think it's a wonderful revelation for someone like me, and I hope you brand those vehicles properly, because branding will lead to awareness, and awareness will lead to greater acceptability and adoption. Good policies always need the support of all stakeholders. So I wish you all the very best as one of India's best companies in what you are intending to do. Thank you very much. What we will now do is to get the third speaker of the day to lay his points here. Mr. Vishnoi, over to you. Mr. Vishnoi, can you hear us?
Yes. Thank you, Siddharth. I hope I'm audible now.
Yes, sir, you are. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Siddharth, and a very good afternoon to all the participants and the speakers and the members of this panel. It's a very pertinent session which has been organized by the organizers, and it has more significance in the sense that today's scenario, the energy scenario of our country, is taking a great transition from from one dimension to the other, and the shift is very clearly visible from fossil fuel side to the clean power, and the kind of policies the government is coming out each day. It is clearly indicating that we really need to reduce the dependence and reliance on the fossil fuels and more, aggression towards the use of RE power, renewable power, clean power, and the hydropower. So there is a clear-cut shifting from fossil fuel side to the clean power side, and this is not only going to save us the crucial foreign exchange for the country, but also the decarbonization, which Joint Secretary from MNRE initially mentioned. We have made sufficient, very appreciable strides towards the affordable and secure and cleaner energy in the last few years, an account of which has been given by the Joint Secretary MNRE. I would throw certain light on the changing scenario in power sector in the wake of the so much of induction of solar and wind, and then the changing policies in power sector, the regulatory provisions in power sector. What is it going to do, and what it has done in the last few years? Now, if I sum it all, first of all, if I try to tell you the core issue here is that we have been increasing the power capacities in a big way in the last few years. Today, we have become almost a grid of 372 gigawatt capacity. We have been adding capacity with great pace, and in the last 10 years, if you see, we have transitioned from a power deficient country to a power surplus country, and this has basically left us a lot of challenges in a way that the grid, the entire transmission network, the transmission assets is spread all over the country. It is experiencing new challenges every day. The power market today has become so vibrant that all the players in the power market, they are now trying to innovate new models. They are trying to innovate. They are trying to experience and experiment new ways to make a dent in this new emerging market, power market, which is quite dynamic in nature. Coupled with that are the very innovative policies on the government side also, with the latest being the round-the-clock power and the real-time market. All these things, they are now making the entire market so competitive and so challenging for all the players in the power market that constant innovation is a must now. The critical issue at the moment is basically to ensure the sustainability of the entire chain, the chain from which starts from generation and the chain which culminates at the consumption at the end user side. Now, this chain is a very, very complicated process. If you see the generators, which are so different in nature, the power coming from different sources, it has to be fed in the same grid. Now, the characteristics of the power flowing from hydro, it's different. Characteristics of power flowing from RE sources is entirely different than thermal, which has the the nature of kind of a base load. It is entirely different. And then all the power from all these resources has to get pooled in the same grid, and then it has its own challenges, and the reliability and resilience of the grid is pretty important at this juncture, because you have to basically integrate the power coming from all these sources, which is having different nature. And if I talk about in terms of technical parlance, so this power basically not only is the time dependent power, but it is also having its own variability. And the operation of these resources also is not dissimilar. There are certain power plants which can be switched on and switched off without any major issue, like the hydropower stations, like the gas power station. But then there are power plants which have their own processes and which have their own requirements to be backed down and to be backed up or ramped up. Now, taking all these limitations in view, the government has now come out with different policies, and there is a great need today to revise the grid code, because the current grid code, when it was set up, we had a different power mix, and the power basket of the country, it had different kind of components, and today the power basket contains not only different types of resources and sources of energies, but also to be operated in a very, very kind of a regulated manner. So under this scenario, it's quite important to revisit the grid code and then start looking at the generation mix to the end consumer and the consumption of electricity, the entire chain. Now, this basically leads us to a challenge that the generation capacities which we have created in a big way in the last few years, it has to be consumed well also, because all the assets which have been created, they have to recover their costs, they have to be sustainable also in the long run, and the demand which has to be basically now ramped up is very, very important. So demand generation is another priority which the government is looking at, and that basically is the outcome of this shifting of fossil fuel side to the power market, clean power side. So this will basically govern the shifting of from one type of energy utilization to the other side of energy scenario. To me, there are two important things at the moment which I would like the participants also to deliberate upon, is that what are we going to do in this so dynamic power market? What are going to be the challenges on the part of the government, on the part of the regulator, on the part of the different players who are in this field? And then what should be the priorities, particularly 3 years or 4 years down the line? Because what we decide today in terms of the power mix is not true 2 years down the line, because things are changing with such a great pace, and the scenario is changing with such a great pace that after 2 years, after every 2 years, we see a new scenario emerging and new technologies emerging, and then we have to again respond to those changes and then try to revisit our policies. So that is very, very important. So one important thing here is that we have to be flexible enough to revisit our strategies all the time, and then support the government in their initiatives in responding to the changes. So let me stop here. I would like to listen other speakers before responding further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vishnoi, for those remarks, and very clearly, some of the technical issues that you have raised are actually issues that need great deliberation. I thank you for your remarks here. I'm going to now request Mr. Neeraj Sethi to come in with his comments at this stage. Over to you, Mr. Sethi.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and it's an honor to be on this panel. A very distinguished team today, yesterday, and today, and the comments of the Honorable Minister defining and the heads of all the institutions and the institutional public sector companies, research and development teams, to outline the strategy. I represent Baker Hughes. Baker Hughes is an energy technology company, and with the recent acquisition of the GE oil and gas business, Baker Hughes has now become what is known as a full stream company, and we provide services and technologies to enable oil and gas producers and refiners and fertilizer companies to bring energy to the end user, right from below the ground to the surface to the FPSO to the end user. Our biggest business is still upstream, and we've been very fortunate to be working here for several decades with companies such as ONGC and Oil India, and enabling these companies to deliver hydrocarbons and helping them become self-reliant in production. Now, I heard some very interesting conversations, and there's a lot of it does ring a bell with our strategy. So look, we are in what I would call as old energy, which is oil and gas hydrocarbon production. But we are also very much part of the energy transition. And despite being a company focused on oil production, we have made some very bold statements in the market. The first one being that we want to be part of the decarbonization. And we have promised to our shareholders that we will be net carbon zero by 2030, by 2050, and 50% reduction in our carbon footprint by 2030. And we are well on our way to do that. Now, the second one, apart from just oil and gas production, that I want to, reinforce some of the panel discussions, in the past 15 minutes, is that we are very bullish about the Indian market, about the growth in energy in India, but also we are very bullish about a transition of decarbonization, not just in renewables, but also decarbonization using fossil fuels. So let me explain. We believe that, when we talk about decarbonization and of course the whole, the theme of these panels is energy security. We need to be thinking about how quickly can we bring energy to what is a kind of deprived population in terms of energy consumption. How practical is it to implement these strategic initiatives that we have? And, what are the commercial supply demands and geopolitical aspects of energy? So one of the things that we see is, the availability of natural gas in the world at very affordable prices is becoming a very important principle that will drive energy consumption going forward. Natural gas is a clean fuel as compared to coal, which India is very much dependent on in terms of power generation. And we feel that our focus and a bullishness about enabling the natural gas economy from production to LNG to compression to power generation is going to be a very key part of our strategy going forward for the next 20 to 30 years. Second important thing that was mentioned today is hydrogen. And it's very interesting that, Dr. Ramakumar had brought up hydrogen, just 15 minutes ago, because just 5 months ago, Baker Hughes tested the first hybrid hydrogen and CNG-based gas turbine for Snam in Europe, in Italy. And we are now talking about putting these gas turbines in hydrogen-ready pipelines, which are currently supplying CNG and will transition to hydrogen. So straddling the CNG and hydrogen economy, I think, is going to be very crucial to drive access to energy. For India, reduction in outflow of foreign exchange, and I'll talk a little bit about the outflow of foreign exchange and the imbalance of supply versus demand, but also to transition to this hydrogen economy eventually. So I think conversion to CNG is much easier. That transition is much easier, and I agree that over dependence on batteries, lithium mining, and to the scale that is required, poses its own set of environmental issues that we may not be yet. We have not crossed that bridge yet. We will know when we get to the point where excessive dependence on certain lithium resources, which are controlled by a few economies in the world, could lead to more geopolitical instability. Like we had control of oil from the Middle East for several years, right? So from an energy security standpoint, I think a diversified portfolio of energy consumption is very important for India. I think CNG is going to continue to be a growth area for us, and for, I believe, alignment with the oil companies and the country leadership. And we believe that, yes, hydrogen will be an important factor that is going to play a major role in decarbonization and energy access, and an alternative electric mobility rather than going to just diesel-based automotives. The second thing I want to briefly talk about is that whenever we are talking about our future in consumption of energy and security of energy, I think I want to kind of caution against what we have seen in the past 8 years and taking that as a benchmark for the future. We will continue to be dependent on hydrocarbons for at least 20 to 30 years to come. And by its very nature, our industry is very cyclic. Yes, we have seen some increase in supply and an imbalance of supply versus demand. But A lot of that has been fueled by capital investments in certain areas, especially shale oil in the United States, which does not always, which have not really paid off. And the implication for this in the overall geopolitics of energy supply, especially in terms of oil, is that now with companies tightening their belts in terms of capital expenditures, you will be seeing a reduction in replacement ratios of oil and gas, plus a very significant reduction in the production of shale oil. In fact, if you look at the North American frac market, which is the hydraulic fracturing market, it is, we've sold our frac business, and so have most of the major service providers. And that is going to cause a fairly significant and something that we cannot ignore, destruction of production in some of these countries. And it is not unforeseeable that we will see a reversal of this demand and supply gap, where demand could exceed supply, and that could cause certain disruptions in the economic recovery for a country that imports 86% of its oil and gas. So to that extent, we are very optimistic that the policies of the current government, and I think that was one of the topics that you had mentioned, is the new policies in terms of oil and gas and mining. I think these are very far-reaching, very progressive policies, probably have leapfrogged us by 10 to 15 years. The OALP and the DSF rounds that have been engineered by the Honorable Minister and DGH, with promises of capital expenditure of upwards of $1.5 billion in exploration and production, driven by leading companies in India such as ONGC and Oil India, of course, and Reliance and Cairn. I think we have to continue to focus on the strategic initiative to execution. And I am very hopeful that these promised investments are going to get translated into where rubber hits the mat, and actually we'll be drilling more wells. We still need to drill a lot more wells today, because more wells means more production. We are drilling less than 5 to 10% of the wells that are annually drilled in the United States of America, which has become from a deficit hydrocarbon state to a net exporter of hydrocarbons today. And I think we cannot lose focus on the primary basket of energy security for India, which is hydrocarbons. Yes, we have to move to a cleaner fuel for gas, and the distribution networks, the importation of LNG and the associated infrastructure, plus the move to hydrogen is important. But I think self-sufficiency or driving Atmanirbharta in the hydrocarbon sector is a very important part of our strategy, be it delivering deep water gas for ONGC in the 98/2, a $5 billion project, just adjacent to it, delivering the same kind of gas for MJ and R cluster wells for Reliance. Both these projects, are going to be helping us deliver approximately 15% of our current consumption. And why 15%? Why not 22 to 24%, as we are seeing in Gujarat? I think gas is going to play a very major role in the energy mix, and we need to continue to support initiatives that drive this very practical, very easily scalable, resource in the country. So I'll leave it at that for the rest of the speakers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sethi. And I take your point that for the foreseeable future, becoming self-reliant in hydrocarbons is perhaps equally important, if not the most important policy objective that we have to strive towards. And given the overall geopolitical situation and the evolving environment in our neighborhood, I completely agree with you about deep sea gas as well. Hopefully we'll be able to take this up subsequently. I have a couple of speakers who've been very patiently waiting by. I am going to go to Mr. Harish Saran now, and then Rashi Gupta ji. Mr. Harish Saran, over to you now.
Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to all of you. I am Harish Saran, Executive Director from PTC. PTC means Power Trading Corporation. So I will limit myself to the energy future as far as electricity is concerned. When we talk about energy security, then energy security at affordable price and keeping the environment in consideration. They are the key aspect for any energy planning. And when we discuss about electricity in particular, which plays an important role in the growth of the country, then there are three key pillars of the chain are generation, transmission, distribution, and the end consumer who is getting the power. These entities, along with market makers, they bring in the efficiency of market mechanism to increase affordability and availability of electricity. The regulators and policy makers ensure that the market functions in orderly and transparent manner. As far as India is concerned, India is the third largest power producer and consumer in the world. In the last 5 months, during this period of COVID, the power sector remains impacted due to COVID-19. But if we compare it with other sectors, the impact is to a lesser extent. We expect that the demand contraction of around 11%, which happened in the last 5 months during the period of COVID, may not going to be the scenario for the remaining period of the year. And in fact, I would like to place here that the electricity demand in the country during September 2020 is higher than almost 3% higher than the demand which was there in September 2019. When we talk about the long term, in the long term, with the growth in economic activities and more energy demand categories such as transportation, etc., shifting towards electricity, the demand is expected to increase substantially from the present 372 gigawatt, and 40% of this is going to come from non-fossil fuel due to India's climate targets by 2030. So in this market forces, they are going to play a very significant and key role in development. I will cover something about our South Asian region also. In the South Asian region, as we know, we have all the countries where sun comes almost 300 days in a year. And if we talk about our neighboring countries like Nepal and Bhutan, they are rich in hydro sources. Lot of opportunities are there which are yet to be exploited. There are transactions which are going on between India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Bhutan. These 4 countries are doing a lot of power trading, and all these started in the last decade only. Rather, I will say that Bhutan, almost their entire 70 to 80% of the country budget that meets by way of selling their power to India. They sell around 2,200 megawatt power to India. Then there are transactions which are taking place between India and Nepal, India and Bangladesh, and to some extent it has started with Myanmar also. So this region can also play a very vital role in energy security. Almost 20% of the population of the world population, it lives in this region only. And power is one of the main engine for the economic growth. So the moment we start taking power as an engine for growth, this region can play a vital role by a close cooperation amongst all these 4 countries. Sri Lanka and India, we are talking about the this under the sea cable link for the last so many years, but nothing has happened. Though Sri Lanka is also a good market for importing power or exporting. I mean, we can give them power during peak hours, and we can take power from them during off-peak hours, or the power can be sold to other countries also. Like recently, the talks have started on carrying the multilateral transaction between these countries. Till now, the transactions are on bilateral basis. Now the things have started moving towards multilateral transaction, like Bangladesh getting power from Bhutan using India as a transit point. Similarly, Nepal selling power to Bangladesh with India as a transit point. Or we can, right now we have so much of stranded capacity in thermal generating stations which are not able to run at their full PLF. So India can supply base load to the countries like Nepal and Bangladesh. So all these dimensions are taking place, and I think in the next 5 to 6 years, a lot of things will take place in this region, which would be very interesting for the development of energy security in the region with the focus on the renewable. So this is what I want to put right now. I am open to all the questions after my session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saran. I will now quickly go to Rashi Gupta for her remarks. Rashi Gupta ji.
Thank you so much. From taking on from the other panelists, I would say that we sustained to some extent COVID-19 pandemic because we all had access to electricity and a good internet. I mean, without which now work from home would not be possible. These meetings would not be possible. So the underlining point here is that access to affordable, sustainable, secure, eco-friendly energy for all is the most important essential aspect for the functioning of our modern economies. Now, energy storage is an important part of achieving this. India has always been pro-storage, but now it is time for a faster adoption of the new technologies and creating an effective financial model for easy access to these technologies. India is a very unique country. We are very diverse yet completely inclusive, and we have to create a balance. We need a mix of sustainable technologies which can give us a secure, sustainable, self-sufficient energy scenario, along with an opportunity to make the products in India. And it should be made in India. That is when we become Atmanirbhar Bharat. We in our company have innovated to make the world's smartest lithium battery with preventive and predictive monitoring solutions. We today have surplus energies in some part of the country, yet some do not have a continuous stable access to energy and power or electricity, which is a kind of imbalance which needs attention and can be improved when we use a combination of distributed and centralized energy storage, as each part of our geography is specialized, and we should tailor make the energy storage solutions, including hybridization of technologies. We can create unlimited possibilities of growth for everyone in this sector once we march towards creating the right energy storage mix, be it with just having hydrocarbons or fuel-based energy generation, may it be hydro-based, may it be gravity storage-based. So all of this have to be a right mix which we need for our country. I hope today, as India is a land of great opportunities, with this August panel and in gathering here, we will be deliberating more on these issues, and I'm looking to have a wonderful journey full of energy with all of you here. I'm open to questions and answers after this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rashi Gupta. And finally, I'm going to invite Mr. Amit Jain, the Senior Energy Specialist at the World Bank, to lay out his remarks for our audience. Amit, over to you, please. You can switch on your video if that's possible for you. The stage is yours now.
Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you very much. I have some bandwidth issues, but can you hear me clearly?
We can hear you clearly.
Siddharth, you have taken a very interesting topic of energy security. Now, if you see, as Rashi was saying, the one thing pandemic has done, it has made the world smaller, closer, and more globalized. Now, whether you and me or Rashi are joining this discussion from building right across my building, or from New York, or from Johannesburg, it doesn't matter anymore. And this change is gonna stay. If we are looking for energy outlook, we are going to become more and more global and look at global investments coming into India. Now, Siddharth, you're seeing the trend in the global investments where KKR, Google, Facebook, Adia, they've all made significant investments in India in retail and telecom sector. And this is all during pandemic times when the demand and market is down. Why? Because India as a country offer promising possibilities and future growth prospects. Now, the question for you and me is, can we mobilize these investments in the energy space to make our country energy secure? We know that CDPQ, CPPIB, ADIA, these large investors have been active in India, but several other institutional and international investors has been still missing in action in the energy space. So I'm going to only focus on one point, Siddharth, that how can we make our energy more secure and more bankable through the vision of one sun, one world, and one grid, and attract global investment. India's energy sector now faces three challenges. One is the off-taker risk. We know that more than 15 gigawatt of PPAs and PSAs has been delayed because the demand is down and DISCOMs are not ready to sign the renewable energy PPAs. We also have state PPAs which are renegotiating in Andhra Pradesh and in Punjab. And of course, there's a transmission mismatch and land acquisition issues in the energy projects. Let's see how we can try to mitigate them through the One Sun, One World initiative. We all know that California has been a leader in the energy space, whether it comes to policy, regulatory, or generation from renewable energy aspect. What we don't know, although we are in energy space, that a significant amount of energy in California is being curtailed because they don't have solid interconnection with the neighboring states. If they sign the Western grid and enter into long-term PPAs with the neighboring states, the curtailment in even a state like California could be improved. But why I'm giving the example of California today? Because India is a country which is under construction towards what California has done. For example, in Rajasthan and Gujarat, we already have 10 to 15 gigawatts of solar and wind coming. In the next 5 years, 60 gigawatts of renewable energy will be in Rajasthan and Gujarat. We have two options, Siddharth. Either we take this in-firm power to Delhi and Mumbai, which are demand centers, or we also explore the options to take it to Oman and Gulf through undersea cables. One of the other panelists also mentioned about the technical and financial feasibility of the undersea cables. We have to see if the country has an objective of 2030, 450 gigawatts, we may be looking at transporting and exporting these countries to neighboring countries through undersea cables or via already existing interconnections with Nepal, Bangladesh, and maybe with Myanmar as well. Now, the cost of undersea cables, of course, is very expensive, but it's coming down, and it is in the range of 2 to 3 or 3.5 rupees. Plus, we can use the peak in Gulf and the peak in India at different timings, and we can increase the capacity utilization factor of transmission from 18 to 36%. Now, this is a strong commercial angle. Why should India export energy to neighboring countries? Because countries like Philippines, Bangladesh, they still have 8 rupees power, unlike India, where the power purchase prices have come down significantly. And I'm not saying all these things in air, Siddharth. Recently, the Australia and Singapore have announced a major status project of connecting them via 3,700 kilometers of undersea cable. It is a 16 billion project. Of course, this is at a very initial and conceptual stage, but it can meet 1/5 of Singapore's demand by 2030. What I'm all saying to all the panelists is that let's at least start thinking on these directions of the concept of one sun, one world, one grid. I'm not saying that we start installing undersea cables today, but let's start exploring this idea towards a vision and a roadmap document. Now, the first step has already been taken, where the World Bank, International Solar Alliance, and MNRE have signed a MOU at the World Solar Technology Summit. And the procurement process of doing a roadmap and a pre-feasibility has already begun. 3 things we need to make it successful. 1, sustainable energy, including renewable energy, storage, and hydrogen. smart technologies, including smart meters, SCADA, EMS systems, and smart mines. And I believe, Siddharth, the people chosen by you on this panelist do all qualify under the smart mines. So let's see if we can have the One Sun, One World initiative, which is a modernized global energy system connecting several continents with HVDC cables and driven by this philosophy. Let me just end by saying a quote from Nelson Mandela that One Sun, One World may look impossible, but it always seems impossible until it's done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amit, and I particularly like the HVDC cable comment that you made, because our entire globe is spanned by massive data cables, undersea fiber optic data cables, which carry unimaginable amounts of data, and India too has several of these cables terminating and originating. But it's a very nice idea that you have mentioned here. Let's see if that happens. We have roughly less than 15 minutes now here on this debate, and I'm getting questions in the chat box. If there are questions, please enter them here and I'll take them up. The first question that I have, this is a question for Mr. Harish Saran. Have transmission and distribution losses reduced due to technology? What is the new technology for transmission across our country which can ensure minimum losses?
If you see the past data, the transmission charges and losses have certainly come down. In the interstate transmission, because all these transmission lines are being constructed and maintained by Power Grid Corporation, there is a drastic reduction in the transmission charges and losses by way of adopting new technologies, new conductors, and new, computer-aided designs, number one. Number two, when we talk about distribution companies, because this transmission charges and losses, if we talk about losses, they play a vital role in the distribution companies. Most of the distribution companies are making losses on account of this transmission losses only. So in the last 5 to 6 years, a lot of distribution companies have reduced their transmission losses by way of upgrading the technology, by way of proper vigilance. And certainly new technologies are always being developed by the manufacturers, by the planners, to have less transmission losses.
Thank you for that answer. I have Mr. Shekhar Dutt here who wants to make a comment. Then I have a question from Jebraj who says, when can we expect biofuels in the market? I imagine that they were already there. So what I'll do is, Mr. Dutt, I'll quickly allow you to make a intervention and your point, and then go back to the questions. Over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Siddharth. I'm taking on from what Harish Saran has said just now. Actually, I had said it in the inaugural session that India has a very low consumer of power per capita. Our per capita, I had said that consumption is 1100 to 1200 kilowatt per hour, which is 1/4 of the world's average. And therefore, and what Harish Saran was telling, that the DISCOMs or distribution companies are all in losses. And there's a huge backlog of payment which has to be paid. My suggestion to all of you is that, firstly, we have to consume more power in order to be more developed. Anything, if we our present share of manufacturing in the GDP is about less than 15%. So we have to increase it at least to 25%. If we have to increase the manufacturing share, we have to produce more and we'll have to consume more power. So my suggestion to all of you, and then there's some quite innovative and intrepid people amongst you, is that create demand of power. Power is like any other consumables. If you create demand and power is available, power is bought by people, DISCOMs will be healthy, and DISCOMs health is absolutely essential. DISCOMs cannot be bailed out by the government all the time, but they have to, because without healthy DISCOMs, we are very happy that power. Somebody had said in this session only that we are surplus power. We are surplus with a very little consumption. We have to be surplus with a large amount of consumption, so that we can really become industrialized India. So my suggestion is that please help industries to develop, create a demand, create consumption demand for power, and let the power be available.
Right.
Good thing about power is that you can even have power, or you can have say consumption of particular type of industries, and you can create that kind of system.
Right. All right. Thank you very much for that intervention. I have a bunch of questions, so I'm going to quickly request my panelists to give short answers for that. For Neeraj Sethi, how can technology increase production of hydrocarbons?
So that's a very good question, and I'll be brief. See, the technology to increase production exists, right? But the technology to increase production has to be contextualized within the fields in which it is applied. It has to be commercially viable, so that the amount you invest in implementing the technology translates into additional production, which justifies the overall financial impact of implementing that technology. Secondly, technology also helps if it is scalable. If you can apply technology in a highly scalable manner, as it's being done in North America, right, you will lower the cost of implementation of that same technology. If you have, maybe drilling 10 wells with a certain technology versus 1,000 wells, your overall efficiency in that capital and rate of investment of that technology, maybe is not as attractive. So I think scalability and taking it to the next level is very important when you're applying technology.
Right. The next question, and I would request somebody in the panel, maybe Dr. SSV Ramakumar could answer that question. The question is from Amrita Saha, who works for L&T. Should stricter security protocols be implemented in the energy sector for plants and refineries, just as happens in the defense sector?
Yeah, if even I was seeing that question in the chat parallelly. If she means security in terms of physical security, already all refinery installations are designated as sensitive installations, and very, very structured SOPs are in place for every refinery, whether it is a private refinery or a state-controlled refinery. They're all manned by that, and the entry protocols are different, and the safety protocols are different. I don't know whether she means that, or she means security in some other terms.
Okay, that's a fair point. I have visited many petroleum and petrochemical units, and I can say that the physical security is top-notch. I think it's a larger question about safety protocols in terms of the operations, Dr. Ramakumar, but your point is well taken. I want to quickly move to another question, which is from Swati Khedekar. If we were to create demand for power and increase consumption, how do you ensure environmental sustainability? Who wants to take that? Quick comment on as we grow, how do we do it in an environmentally responsible manner? Who can answer that question? Anybody can please unmute themselves and answer this from our panel.
I can answer this question.
Yes, Mr. Saran, please go ahead.
Yeah, as I want to put it here that recently Government of India has given a deadline for all the thermal power generators to put up certain technology by 2022. By that time, if they don't put that technology, they will not be allowed to operate. So a lot of interests are being taken by the Environment Ministry as well as Ministry of Power to ensure environment.
Sure. There's one more point which has been offered by Mr. Pradeep Chandra Pant. This is more in terms of a comment, so I'm going to read it because we are running out of time. Creation of demand will mainly be from industry in the domestic sector. That is, per capita consumption will depend on purchasing power of masses, which is very true. We are undergoing one of our sharpest economic slowdowns, and that is manifesting in the entire energy value chain. In some ways, it is also a wake-up call for the cost structures of many of our energy producers to change. There are legacy costs that many of our energy producers are stuck with, especially those who have state ownership and therefore have to respond to various needs and cannot undertake deep or drastic cost cutting during emergency.
There is a, this comment has arisen because I told about per capita power consumption is low. Actually, per capita power consumption is also low because large industries are not there, power consuming industries.
Yes.
So you have to have large power consuming industries which will in turn produce goods. And therefore our manufacturing sector would increase in terms not only volume but also in value. And
absolutely
breadth of the country.
So absolutely. And as power experts like yourself know that the index of industrial versus residential usage, even in the most developed countries, is very different. And your point is very well taken that large-scale industrial manufacturing capacity is where most of the power consumption would exist. Residential usage is still, of course, on an average basis low. But if you look at the socio-economic spread and the rural-urban divide, then purely on an urban base, the numbers will stack up very differently. There are some other points, but I'm completely out of time. The administrator is telling me to wrap up, and there is a point about electric cars, a boon or bane in a country like India. 60-second answer from Dr. Rashi Gupta. You want to answer that very quickly, ma'am?
Electric mobility is definitely benefit to all of us in the country. We reduce the pollution, we make it greener, we make it more affordable. Now that is what we have to achieve. And we increase the electricity consumption. So we in turn increase the electricity generation, and we add more renewables to this.
Right. I'm going to end this session here. And Dr. Gupta, just one point which we can perhaps leave for some other time. The debate in the Indian Railways when they were moving towards electrification from diesel locomotives was very interesting, because at that time Indian Railways had done a significant amounts of research which showed that the cost of electrification per kilometer as well as the pollution impact per kilometer of electricity was far higher than diesel. And Dr. Ramakumar would perhaps know what I am referring to, but that I think is a subject for some other time. Electric mobility is the flavor of the season. So we are going to all...
Siddharth, just one quick caveat to Rashiji's comment. I fully agree with her. Electric car is a boon in terms of efficiency, in terms of emission reduction. But the caveat is that the electricity to charge the battery has to be renewable.
Agree completely. And that's why I said we have to add more and more renewables. We have to make our energy mix more sustainable.
Otherwise, you are shifting the urban city pollution to somewhere else. And
agree, sir. Absolutely agree. Agree to you.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm going to wrap it here because when you have a good debate, you should know when to end so that all our audience wants this wonderful panel to come back some other time. I'm going to thank all of you for your time, for your participation and attention, and also to all those who have been tuned into this live stream. Thank you very much.